to detect debuggers. You can look for breakpoints. You can check some yourself in memory to see if you've been modified. A lot of times this is what happens. You can do hardware debugging detection, where you check CPU flags for certain signatures or settings that indicate that you're running in a debugger. People used to use soft ice a while back, which was a pretty good kernel debugger, and there's pages and pages of methods for detecting soft ice. Some pieces of malware will use SEH tricks. This is the structured exception handler. Some people use this for writing exploits too. Basically, it's used to handle errors in running code. Malware will use this to unpack itself. So what it'll do is it'll generate an exception that points to the next chunk of code that understands how to deobfuscate the rest of the code. The problem with this is it causes the debugger to think that the program's crashed, or that the exception is for the debugger. And so in some cases the debugger will die, or you won't really be able to advance efficiently in the code. We've seen some malware actually do a divide by zero in order to generate these. Shifting decode frames is where the packer or the obfuscator will decrypt a small part, a small piece of the code, run it, re-encrypt it, and then move on to the next piece. These are probably the hardest to deobfuscate. It's very hard to defeat. It's similar to the way PatchGuard works.
Okay, so one of the ideas we got upon here is that it's almost as cheap to use and effective to use hardware for your analysis. It's almost as cheap, and it's nearly impossible to detect, because this is the customer for all the malware authors. This is what they're doing. So there's a couple tools that I want to go over real quick that we found, and we'll talk about that. So cost comparison. Last night I looked up on Dell what the absolute cheapest little mini crap box I could find was. So brand new, it's $349, and it includes an XP license in it, provided you pay for software. And then a copy of Deep Freeze to emulate the restoration feature runs about $45, compared to VMware, which is $189 and $278. So this is a rough estimate of cost. As far as replicating VMware snapshots, which is one of the more useful tools, I wanted to put a plug out for Phoronix Deep Freeze. I have no monetary interest in this company, but it's been a pretty good tool for me. So basically, it implements copy on write protection in the kernel. It's not perfect and it's hackable, but I haven't seen anything specifically targeted yet that wasn't specifically meant to say that this code was buggy. So malware samples themselves haven't actually got it. But another thing that you should do is actually disk image using DD or whatever methods you have available as a last resort. Other good tools, the Firewire kernel debugger. Those are always fun. WinDebug. Thank you, Microsoft. This tool is awesome. And this new program called
Cicer.
I don't actually know how to pronounce that. But this is a soft ice replacement, or appears to do much of the old functionality that you can actually legitimately buy. But you have to be careful with all these because they're still detectable. Okay, so the basic Achilles heel of a packed or protected piece of malware is that if it executes, it has to be unpacked. That meaning the Intel CPU can't actually execute gibberish code.
Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit over manual unpacking so you can see how labor intensive this work is if you haven't done it before, and see why he's automating me out of a job. Okay, so the way an unpacker works basically is that, and by unpacker I mean what's actually in the piece of malware unpacking itself, is that there'll be a write to an area of memory where it's beginning to decode. This memory will be read from and executed. There'll be more writes to memory. And so this is sort of a process we can track. Like Danny said, the CPU can only execute real code. If you send that pile of numbers that we saw earlier in an encrypted binary, the CPU doesn't know what to do with that. So at some point, it has to be clear. And so it's all related to timing. If we can get there at that point when the code is clear, then we can unpack it. So there's a few stages to the manual unpacking process. First thing you got to do is identify what it's packed with if you can. There are more and more samples coming out that are using custom packers that are written that aren't released. there's some tools that we'll talk about in a minute on how to detect this. The next and probably most important step is discovering OEP, or the original entry point. What this means is the point in the code where the original program before it was obfuscated is. If you can find this, you're good. The next thing you do once you find the original entry point is dump the process memory to a file. This is a file that you can analyze with IDA or any other disassembly tool. Sometimes you have to fix up the file. There may be problems with the PE header or the import table. At this point, you should be able to analyze the file. So on the first stage, identifying what the packer type is, there's a whole bunch of tools out there. PEID is probably the best one. It has a huge database of signatures. We worked with the Metasploit guys on modifying MSF PE scan to do this. And then Aero Carrera's tool has had some patches and modifications from us to do this as well. You can manually look at the section names in some cases and see what it's packed with, and I'll show you what that means. There's a few other tools out there, but they're not as good as PID or some of the others. So this is a screenshot of several tools looking at a piece of malware that's been packed. PID is in the middle, a little gray window there. And you can see in the bottom, hopefully it says UPX. In the black window is MFS PScan. There's a screenshot of our site up there. And on the far left, you can see an IDA UPX over and over again. That's looking, that's an indication that it's packed with UPX. Okay, so for the next stage, trying to find OEP. Thankfully, if you use OllyDebug, there's a whole bunch of scripts out there for most of the generic sort of low-end packers that can help you do this. A couple of websites I recommend, especially OpenRCE, Pedro Amini's site. It's a great resource for this. And there's tools out there, but a lot of these tools are signature-based, meaning that if the tool doesn't know about the packer, it can't do anything for you. So here's just a screenshot. We'll show a demonstration in a second. Okay, so the next stage in the process is dumping the process memory to a file. There's a few tools for this. I like OllyDump and LoadPE the best. Sometimes one doesn't work quite right, so I use the other one. You could write your own custom tools, which we've done in the past. This is basically some pseudocode of how to do it. Open up the process, read the memory, write it to a file. It's pretty straightforward. And here's a screenshot of some tools dumping it. Okay, finally you're going to have to fix up the file to make sure that it's actually legible. Imports are probably one of the most important things when you're analyzing malware, because it's a list of functions that the malware is using from Microsoft DLLs and APIs that can give you an idea of its capabilities, like can it write to the registry, can it delete files, what does it do? So here's a screenshot of a couple of tools. Really, there's a tool out there called ImportRec. That's probably the only realistic tool you can use for doing this. I've seen a few other things, but they don't really work. Okay, so at this point, you should have clean disassembly. You should be able to see the imports. Functions should make sense. There's strings, all the stuff you need to analyze the malware. One good point is we're not releasing a piracy tool. Some people want a binary that matches byte for byte the original before it was obfuscated. And really, that doesn't give us much value in malware analysis. If you're trying to pirate software, that's great, but our tools won't help you do that.
Bad.
Well, having a byte for byte copy is good.
Right.
Okay, so this is a screenshot of imports. The middle window there just shows what clean imports look like. Okay, so we got a movie. All right, I can't actually see the movie on my screen, so I'm going to lean over a little bit here. All right, so basically I've dumped this packed file in PID to identify that it's packed with UPX. Now I'm going to run it to show it actually functions. Here in TCP view, it's listening on a port. This is some cheap Trojan we found out there. So we're going to open this thing in IDA so you can sort of see what an obfuscated file looks like. You can see IDA gives us an error right away that the imports are screwed up. And normally in that names window, there's a bunch of names of functions and stuff. It's pretty much blank. The functions window is blank. So this isn't very valuable for analysis. The imports this is sort of standard malware imports. Normally there should be like 100 things in here. There's only a few. So that's an obfuscated binary. We can't get much information about what it does this way.